Hello, everybody. Welcome to the final Esri Law Enforcement webinar of 2019. Today, we're going to be talking about documenting and sharing best practice analysis workflows using tasks in ArcGIS Pro. I'm John Beck, Director of Law Enforcement Solutions, and I'm joined today by Chris Delaney, our Law Enforcement Technical Lead. Let's start by taking a look at our agenda for today. First, I'm going to hand it over to Chris in a minute, and he's going to tell us what a task is in ArcGIS Pro, why you would use a task, and applications of tasks for law enforcement workflows. Then he's going to talk about how to create tasks, configure those tasks, and then share the tasks that you've created. At the end of this webinar, we're going to give you some next step resources, and as time allows, we're going to take questions from you. So if you have any questions during the webinar, go ahead and post them in the chat window, and we'll answer as many as we can get to at the end, and if we don't get to them at the end, then we'll follow up directly with you via email. So with that, let's get started. Chris, why don't you tell us what a task is in ArcGIS Pro?
Thanks, John, and good morning or good afternoon to you, wherever you are. I'm Chris Delaney. I'm the Esri Law Enforcement Technical Lead, and I'll be running the majority of the rest of today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. As John mentioned, we're going to be talking about tasks, which is a new capability that's unique to ArcGIS Pro. And we wanted to do this webinar today to help educate our law enforcement users on tasks, because we feel that they have got a lot of great application for enabling law enforcement users to organize and share their workflows. So just at a very high level, a task in ArcGIS Pro is a way to organize a bunch of sequential steps that are going to walk you through some kind of repeatable analytic or GIS related workflow. So the idea being that in any workflow we do using desktop GIS, we often have multiple steps. Just think about the process of building a hard copy map itself. First things first, we need to get our data. Maybe we have it in a spreadsheet, so we need to add that data as a spreadsheet. We need to then geocode that data, whether it has XYs or whether it has addresses. That then creates a feature class or a shapefile. From there, we would symbolize that layer to an appropriate symbology relative to that data. And then we would create a layout where we might customize the look and feel of the layout, and then ultimately print that layout off or export it as a PDF. So in any GIS work that we do, we're going through a sequential series of tools or commands in desktop GIS in order to accomplish our task at hand. And that's really what tasks are meant to do. They're meant to document those processes so that you can memorialize processes that you use, that you can share those processes with others to use, that maybe if you've got long, complicated processes, that you can simplify those processes or make the work of going through that process a little bit more efficient, so that maybe if there's a workflow that you only occasionally do, one of them I always think about is something like creating Clery Act reports for crime around college campuses. That's a workflow that folks in law enforcement only do occasionally, right? They do it once a year. And instead of having to like rack your brain to remember how you did that last year, imagine having just kind of a little document that you could walk through that's going to hold your hand through each single step of all of those steps to create an analysis for a Clery Act report. That's what tasks are meant to do. So in this way, they really represent a great way to document workflows that we have in desktop GIS and to share those out with other users, or for your own purposes to come back to them at a later point. So tasks are really a unique capability specifically for ArcGIS Pro. You won't find tasks in WebGIS, you won't find tasks in ArcMap. If you have ArcGIS Pro, you have tasks available to you now, but if you're not using ArcGIS Pro, you may have seen some of our other webinars talking about the crime analysis add-in for ArcGIS Pro, between the crime analysis add-in for ArcGIS Pro and the ability to take advantage of tasks. These are great reasons why, if you're only an ArcMap user now, it really makes a lot of sense to make the jump into ArcGIS Pro, because if you're on maintenance with your licensing for ArcMap, you already have ArcGIS Pro as part of your existing license. So there's a couple of reasons why you would use a task in ArcGIS Pro, and I've alluded to some of them already. One of the ones that I think it's really best for is as you're training new users, maybe generally to desktop GIS or specifically to do certain forms of analysis, it's a great training tool. So it really can be kind of an interactive tutorial to performing a particular kind of analysis. And I think as the use of ArcGIS Pro and the adoption of ArcGIS Pro grows dramatically, you'll start to see this in a lot of the ways in which any number of people who train desktop GIS will now start to adopt tasks as a way to help you learn how to do various tasks and various actions in desktop GIS. It's also a way to ensure that, let's say you're a senior GIS user and you have a number of junior GIS users and you want them to perform some kind of workflow in a specific way. Tasks enable you to enforce that workflow in a best practice form. By forcing people to follow a certain set of steps, you're ensuring that they're going to follow the process that you want them to follow. And that could include things like presetting parameters for doing things like kernel density. If you want kernel density analysis, you're creating hotspots, and you want them done with a certain cell size and a certain search radius, you can enforce those parameters as part of the task that you would have your users run. And ultimately, by building out tasks and having users use tasks, you can really streamline the efficiency of executing tasks that otherwise manually take quite a bit longer to accomplish. Tasks are really handy, and they're actually very, very simple to use. Tasks exist as their kind of own standalone files. So you can create a task and it can live in an ArcGIS Pro project, but it also can be saved off as its own standalone file. So when it comes to using tasks, when you're in ArcGIS Pro, you've got the ability to take a task item that someone else has given you, it's a standalone file, and bring it into your ArcGIS Pro project and immediately start to use it. Or you can build task items yourself. And so I'll show you in just a minute how you go about doing both of those things. So we've talked generally a bit about some of the kind of applications of tasks in law enforcement. But I just wanted to kind of note that I think as organizations start to become more and more familiar with tasks, there's a ton of opportunity to enhance the use of tasks to drive an understanding across the broader law enforcement GIS user community, and in particular the crime and intelligence analysis communities, so that you can use tasks to accelerate the training of new analysts. So tasks can be a great way to get a brand new analyst up to speed with your workflows, or it could be a great way to have, maybe you have some sworn officers who are going to be performing some light duty work as a crime analyst temporarily. They're not going to be in that position long. It's not really reasonable to expect that we're going to spend a whole lot of money on training courses for those individuals, but we could build some tasks so we can make it easier for them to be productive quickly using tasks. One of my other hopes is that over time, you as a member of the law enforcement GIS user community build tasks on various kinds of analytical methods that you use, and you share them out so that others in the law enforcement GIS user community can take advantage of those tasks and benefit from the new analytical methods and workflows that you devise, and you can share that information to others using tasks. And that ultimately, the work that we do in desktop GIS for organizations can be simplified by enabling organizations to create an entire task library of the things that they most commonly do with desktop GIS. So you can imagine that for perhaps your crime analysis unit, as you can see over here on this side of the slide, on the right side of the slide, that you might have a task for all of your most commonly used forms of crime analysis. So a group of tasks associated with tactical analysis, and a group of tasks associated with strategic analysis or intelligence analysis or administrative analysis. And that each of the tasks that are under those groups are going to walk you through the complete workflow to do that particular form of analysis. So in that way, tasks really represent kind of an exciting opportunity to document and streamline the work that we do in desktop GIS to benefit training needs and to be able to extend our knowledge base to other organizations and analysts in our community who need that information. So let's start by talking about how you go about creating a task. The first thing you need to know about a task is the kind of overall anatomy of a task. When you first go to create a task, what you're creating is a task item. A task item is basically the holder for any number of individual tasks that you want to create. So as you can see in these screenshots, we first build a task item, and in that task item, we can have multiple tasks, which if we want to, we can group into task groups. An individual task itself, once, for example, where it says create buildings, this represents an individual task. When I click on this arrow, it's going to open up that task, and a task is comprised of steps. So each of these steps is going to be kind of a component of the larger workflow, or whether that's a geoprocessing tool or whether that's a command in ArcGIS, in ArcGIS Pro. So you have one or many tasks inside of a task item, and then that task item is ultimately the thing that you can share with other users. So what does that look like in practice? Well, the example that I'll show you in just a minute live is a task around performing a density change analysis. And to do a density change analysis workflow, you need to have a bunch of different steps. First, you're going to take some data and create a selection that represents your current period. Maybe it's you're going to look at density change year to year or month to month. So maybe you need a current period for the current year. Then you're going to create a kernel density out of that selection. Then you're going to make another selection for the previous period, whether that's the previous month or whether that's the previous year. Create a kernel density out of that selection. You're then going to use the density change tool in the crime analysis toolbar to be able to identify the areas that got hotter in the current period compared to the previous period and the areas that got colder. And then from there, you'll maybe want to customize the styling of that density change raster output to better fit your needs. So each of these individual boxes on this workflow chart represent a different geoprocessing step in a larger workflow. So when it comes to tasks, each of these boxes represent a task step in a larger task. And this particular workflow is just one of many tasks that we might ultimately put into a task item to memorialize the kinds of common analytical work that we do. Building tasks is relatively easy. First step is to design a task item, and the task items and tasks are going to be managed in a task designer pane. When you start to build these out, the first thing it's going to ask you for is for you to name your task item and describe it. And then as you go about designing individual tasks and the steps inside of those tasks, the task designer pane is going to switch the different sets of parameters and options that you have that are presented to you to customize those individual task steps. So let's take a look at this now live in ArcGIS Pro, and we're going to do two things. First, we're going to import a task that's already been built and walk through that task so you have an understanding of how this actually works. And from there, after that's done, then we're going to show you how you go about building a new task item and what the task designer looks like. So here we are in ArcGIS Pro. If your ArcGIS Pro looks different than mine, this is because I'm using the dark mode of ArcGIS Pro rather than the light mode. That's why this is ArcGIS Pro is all in black. And what I have here is some violent crime data from 2001 to 2019 in Rochester, New York. And what I'm going to do is apply a hotspot change task to this to be able to help me build a density change raster. And I'm going to compare 2018 violent crime to 2017 crime using that workflow. So I have already built a task for this. In order to add that task to my project, I'm going to go to the Insert ribbon in ArcGIS Pro, and I'm going to go to the Task menu option. And as I open this up, the second option that I see is Import an Open Task. So I'm going to select that. It's going to prompt me for my Explorer, and I'm going to select a task that I have in my project folder called Final Hotspot Change. And you'll notice that it has a suffix here called Esri tasks. That's how it's identifying it as a standalone task file. And this is just one single file, so it makes it very easy to move around as you need it. I'll press OK, and that's going to open up the tasks pane for me along my right-hand side in ArcGIS Pro. My task item, as you can see, is called Make Hotspot Change Map. And this is a very simple task item because it only has one task inside of it. As I mentioned before, I could have multiple tasks here and they could be grouped if I wanted to, but this is a simple task item. It only has one task inside of it. I'm going to start working on this task, I'm going to come over to the far right-hand side and click the Open Task button to start working in this task. And you can see that that's just prompted me to see a series of 6 steps that are exactly what we just described in that conceptual diagram earlier in the webinar. The very first step says select current period. I've been given, the author of this text has provided some descriptive information on what I'll be doing. And then you can see that parameters for a particular geoprocessing tool have been embedded right into the task window itself. So it's very easy to walk through this whole step. I'm not having to go to a whole bunch of different windows. Everything I need is right here in this one little task window. And what I'm actually using here is the Select Features from Layer tool. And it says select your layer from input features drop down, then write the following SQL expression defining your current period. So what I'm going to do here is select my violent crime layer. It already has, you'll notice that it has set up for me what the output layer is going to be called. So this is an important concept in task that you can preset parameters for any of the tools, and this will help your users simplify their process for what it is you want them to perform. I could have preset, if I wanted to, a expression for this, but I'm going to do that, and my expression is going to be reported date year is equal to 2019 because I'm selecting my current year that I'm in, and that's all I have to do here. Once that's done, then I can come down here and run the current step. If I needed to, and I already had this set up, I could just skip this step and move to the next step. As I press the Run button, it's going to initiate the Make Feature Layer tool, and you can see that it's run, and it's already moved on. You can see that it automatically proceeded then to the next step. And I know that this is run successfully because I saw the little geoprocessing notification pop up at the bottom, but then I can also see I have a new layer in my map reflecting the current period. Great. So now I've moved on to step 2, which is current period kernel density. As I come down to the parameters for this tool, again, I can see some descriptions here. It's got some preset parameters. You can see the cell size has been preset, as well as the search radius and the output name of the raster. And it's done some, it's controlling the output coordinate system that my raster is going to be in. So now all I have to do is just run this, and now it's going to run the kernel density against the current period selection of violent crimes for 2018 that I previously defined. And boom, just like that, I have my kernel density for violent crime for 2018. I can then move, it automatically moved me again to the next step in this process, which is select previous period. And so I'm going to do the same thing again this time. I'm selecting violent crime. It's going to give me a preset output layer name of previous period. And then I'm just going to have to go do the same thing of setting my SQL expression for the time range that I want reflected in the previous period. And in this case, it's going to be 2017 because I'm comparing 2018 violent crime to 2017 violent crime. So now all I need to do is press run, and this is going to run and then generate a new selection so I can see this in my map. I now have a previous period layer, and I can do the same thing here with my previous period layer, creating a kernel density for that. Same set of parameters, it just has a different preset name. It's going to create a raster kernel density output called old. Then I run this. It's going to generate that kernel density. This is step 4, you'll notice in my process. And then it just jumped automatically to step 5. And as you'll notice, it's already running step 5 for me. I don't even have to do anything. And this is an option that I've manually, as the author, created. I didn't even have to do anything. The user of my task, that step was just automatically run. I didn't even have to do anything as the user of the task. It created the density change, ran the density change tool for me. And then the very last step in the task was styling, and it toggled on the symbology pane for me so that I can look at this output. I can see that the classification method was quantile. Maybe I don't really think this is a very appropriate way to symbolize this data. That's the default for the density change tool in the crime analysis solution. But maybe I want to look at this symbolizing it using an equal interval because that makes a little bit more sense. And then maybe I'm going to have my mid values. I'm going to turn the color off for that. So now I have a much more representative density change showing in red the areas that got hotter for violent crime in 2018 compared to 2017, and in blue got colder in 2018 compared to 2017. So that's a process, that analysis process, that's 6 steps long. For many analysts, that could take a long time to get up to speed to build that. And now with that task, in just a few minutes, we were able to successfully execute that analytical process and generate a useful and meaningful analytical output. So that's really the power of tasks. And once I'm done with that, I can just press finish. And now my task is all done and I have that finished output. Now, what about making a new task? If I want to make a new task, I can also go to the insert ribbon, and under the task menu, you'll see that there's the ability to create a new task item. What I'm going to do now as we start to build out a new task is I'm going to build a new task representing a 3D call sequence analysis where we have some call detail record data and some cell site and sector data. We want to use the cell phone analysis tools in the crime analysis solution. So here they are. Here's the new cell phone analysis tools. We want to build a task to make it easier for our users to create a 3D visualization of a sequence of calls. So what I'm going to do is I've got my task designer open. The first thing it asks me to do is create some description information for my task item. I'm going to call that task item 3D call sequence analysis. My author is Chris Delaney, and my summary is just going to be a set of tasks relevant to preparing a 3D call sequence analysis. So that's going to describe my overall task item, and then I can come over here to the task window, and now I have the ability to start adding in new tasks. So I will do that. In order to do that, I can press this new task item, and it's going to ask me, okay, well, what do I want this task to be called? I'm going to call it the 3D sequence map, create 3D call sequence map. I'm not going to give it a description. And then I can open this task to start to add steps to that task. So I'm going to hold right there, and we're going to go back into our PowerPoint demonstration, our PowerPoint, to talk a little bit more about the kinds of things you can do to configure steps in a task. So what are the kinds of things you can do in a step of a task? Well, first and foremost, any command or geoprocessing tool that exists in ArcGIS Pro can be called from a task step. So think about all the tools you most commonly use. It can be anything that you would click on, basically, in any menu in ArcGIS Pro, or any tool that exists in the toolbox pane. So we can even embed the parameters that are necessary for those tools inside of that task pane, which is great because it simplifies the experience for your user of the task. We can control behaviors of layers. So we can make selections, we can select features inside of a layer, we can clear features inside of a layer, we can save off subsets, we can control visibility and selectability and editability and snappability, we can turn on and off labels, and then we can even turn on and off various maps or map views and connect them even to other map views. So a wide array of the core sets of ArcGIS Pro functionality are accessible for you to expose to a user of a task. And there's really two ways to build a set of task steps. First, you can record your actions. So if you've ever used something like Microsoft Excel macros, where there's a record button, and once you press the record button, you now just move your mouse around and click on all the different menu buttons that you want to do to define the sequence of steps that you want to perform. You can do it exactly that way in ArcGIS Pro, where you press a record button and then you just use your mouse and click around the regular ArcGIS Pro interface, and every mouse click is going to represent a new step. Alternatively, you can manually configure the commands or the geoprocessing tools that you want to be able to use in the task designer window. So it's really whichever way you prefer to do it. You have more complete control using the manual creation tools, but the record action tools are a really simple way to just kind of quickly document the series of steps. So if you've done something, you're like, oh, I remember how I did this. Let me make a task, let me record all the actions, and then I'll come back to it later and I'll kind of flesh it out and make it cleaner and provide some additional descriptive information. It's a great way to build tasks. So the configuration properties that you have for a task step, as I mentioned before, first, there's going to be 4 menus. The general menu is going to be where you're going to describe the task step. You can control, if you want like a little tooltip to pop up as somebody mouses over the step, you can put that in there in the tooltip window. You can add in instructions on what you want someone to do in that step. And then you can also add in instructions that'll show up in the bottom of the task for what you want them to do with respect to running or proceeding to the next step. And then down here, you've got some control over how you want the user to experience what happens in that step. And I'm going to explain that further in just a minute. The second set of menu options, property options, are around the actions themselves. This is where you're going to set the command or the geoprocessing tool for that step. And then you also have the ability to, kind of like animations in PowerPoint, kind of set pre-command or geoprocessing tool actions that happen either right before or right after or when you're exiting the step. So you can create kind of dependencies for that step. The view properties are going to control which map is active and the step is being applied to. So if you need to work with multiple maps over the course of a workflow, you can switch between maps and control which map is being worked on at that particular step. And then lastly, you have a contents properties section that's going to let you control the properties for each individual layer in that map, whether they're visible in the table of contents, selectable, editable, snappable, and whether that layer itself is selected. So when it comes to step behaviors, there's basically 4 ways that you can configure a user to proceed through a test step. First is manual, which is the user is going to run the action. They're going to press a button that says run. That's going to run that command or geoprocessing tool. And then once that is complete, the user would then have to press a button called proceed to move to the next step in the overall task. The second option is auto run. And that's where as the user comes to that step, the tool is just going to automatically run for you. So they wouldn't have to press a run button, but when that step has finished running, the user would have to press a button to proceed to the next step. A third option is auto proceed, and that's when the user is going to manually press a button to run the step, but then once that step is completed, the task automatically moves to the next step. And that's what you saw in my example. A number of my tasks were set up to auto proceed, where as soon as the kernel density was done, it just automatically moved you to the next step in the task. You didn't have to press another button. And then lastly, you have an option to have automatic steps, where as soon as you get to that step in the task, it just runs, and then once it's done, it automatically proceeds to the next step. That's what happened with running the density change example in my example. It automatically started, the user didn't have to do anything, and then once it was done, it moved on to the styling step. And even if you want to, you can make those automatic steps completely hidden to your user. So it doesn't even have to be visible for your user. And if it's a workflow where someone isn't necessarily going to do each step every single time, you can set optional skip buttons in each step to enable them to just jump past it if it's not relevant to their work. So let's look at those 2 ways in which we can create tasks, and what that looks like. I'm going to hop right back into ArcGIS Pro. And so here I am with my task designer. I'm creating a task called the 3D call sequence map. And so over here in my tasks, I can now add a new task step. The first task step in creating a 3D call sequence map is to use in the cell phone analysis tool set, the import cell sites tool. So I'm going to create a task step that does that. I've already kind of set this up. I'm going to call this name import cell sites and sectors. I'm going to add in some instructions information on what to do in this step. And then I've got some instructions for how to run and proceed. And the step behavior that I would run here set up here is that I will have an auto proceed where the user would run the tool and then it would automatically proceed. And I'll add an optional option to skip this. And then what I can do here is I can come into the actions parameter, and I have the ability to either press this edit button, and that's going to give me the ability to choose either a command or a geoprocessing tool I want to use. I'm going to pick a geoprocessing tool, and I'm going to select import cell sites. Here it is right here. And then I'm going to make sure this embed is checked. And now all the parameters for that particular tool show up right inside of my task window. And I am done with that step. Now the next thing that I want to do is I want to show you how you can create a task step by recording a command. So to do that, I'm going to press the record commands button, and then I'm going to go up to cell phone analysis, and I'm going to select the import cell phone records step. That would be my second step here. And I'm just going to add in a name of my own for this step. I'm going to call it import CDR spreadsheet. Again, in the general parameters, I'm going to paste in some instructions for running that tool, some instructions for how I want people to run and proceed. And then I'll select a auto precede. Oops, I've done too many of these. Let me delete this. As I selected this tool, it already created that second option. I need to stop recording. Actually, you know what? Let me keep recording and I'll show you what it looks like to kind of walk through this entire process. Doing a 3D call sequence analysis, first, I'm going to bring in my cell sites and sectors. I've already done that. Then I'm going to import my cell phone records. Then I'm going to use my record tool again, and I'm going to go to the Enhance by Attributes tool, and I'm going to select Features to 3D by Time, because I'm going to convert my resulting tools to from 2D polygon cell phone sectors and cell phone sites to 3D. I'm going to then, after I have that, I'm going to go and do the same thing. I actually got to do it twice, once for my points and once for my polygons. And then I'm going to go to run my incident sequence tool. And there you go. So now I've set up all of the different steps in my overall analysis. And now I can just come in and click on each one of these steps. And if I want to modify them, or for example, add in instructions, I can do that. Add a new name. If I wanted to change the parameters of that particular task, I can either go in and change the tool, I can add some preconditions, I could change and modify the views or the contents. So it becomes very, very easy now to start to kind of work through that process. One thing you'll notice here is I'm seeing this step and I don't have the parameters embedded in here. So I'm going to go edit this and I go turn on this. Oh, it's set up as a command tool and it doesn't want to let me do that here. So maybe I'm going to go need to change this to a geoprocessing tool. I'm going to select my import cell sites tool because I want it to be embedded inside of my actual task. Now when I'm done, and then I go to my task, it'll be there available for me to use inside, embedded into the actual task itself. When I'm all done creating my task, I can simply exit my designer, and then I can see the task that I've created, and I've got the ability to kind of skip through those steps. And here I can see for importing my cell sites, I've got the parameters of that tool all embedded right here inside of my task itself. So when it comes to building these tasks, I'm going to just go back to edit in the designer to go and modify this a little bit more. It asks me if I want to interrupt my current task. Yes, that's fine. If I want to go and preset parameters, I can do that in the actions menu. I can go and edit that geoprocessing tool. And then if I wanted to preset some values, I could set them up in here. Maybe I have, I know my field, my X field for my data is always going to be called longitude. And my Y field is always going to be called latitude. So I could preset some of those values in here so that it's expecting them when a user is going to run these in your tools. Note that as you preset additional parameters into your tasks, that's creating a dependency on that task to expect data in a specific form, which means that your task is going to be less extensible for general users. So as you're building out tasks, it's very important to remember that that you need to figure out who you're building the task for. Is it someone who's going to use data that's exactly the same as the data that you were creating with the task? So the data schema will match perfectly, or is their data schema going to be a little bit different? That's going to determine how much presetting of parameters you can do with your tasks. So last topic I want to talk about is about once you've built a task, how do you go about sharing that task with other people? And there's two main ways that you can share tasks in ArcGIS Pro. The first is by creating a task file, which is a standalone file that can be saved outside of an ArcGIS Pro project and that other people can use to import into their ArcGIS Pro projects. That task file doesn't include any data. It is just simply the task item with the task and the steps that you've described, any parameters that you've put in, and any description, instructional information that you've added to that task. Alternatively, if you have a task where you've got data dependencies associated with that task, the best thing to do is to take your ArcGIS Pro project and zip it up into an ArcGIS Pro project package. If you're not familiar with what an ArcGIS Pro project package is, think about it essentially as a zipped up ArcGIS Pro project. It's going to take and put into one single file all of the project itself, the data, the tools, the tasks that you have, and it's going to wrap it up into one single thing so you can share that single thing with other people. So if your tasks are data dependent, you're going to need to build a project package. If they are generally extensible to any kind of data that might be applied to them, you can make an Esri task file. And making an Esri task file is as easy as right-clicking on any task that you have in an ArcGIS Pro project. You can see you can export to file, and then you can do a save as. So the way that looks in practice is very simple. I just need to go to the catalog pane in ArcGIS Pro. Here is my make hotspot change map task item. I can right-click this, export to file, save as, and then it's going to prompt me for a place to save that. So it's very easy, and now those tasks are ready to be shared with other users. So you kind of mentioned this before, but really, if it's a repeatable workflow and it's useful in other data sources, and it doesn't have data schema dependencies, then making a task item is the right fit. You're going to want to make a product pack and an ArcGIS Pro project package if the data that you use in your tasks that data schema is going to be needed exactly for the task to work. But there is a good thing that's available anytime you bring a task into an ArcGIS Pro project. It will enable you to do automated checks to ensure that there aren't any particular issues with that task with respect to kind of things that it needs, inputs that it needs. But the good news is, even if you find those kinds of errors that pop up, you have the ability in your ArcGIS Pro project to then subsequently edit that task. So if you need to make some minor modifications to the task that someone else shared to you in order to be able to make it work with your data, you can just open up the task designer, you can go make those minor tweaks, and then boom, you're ready to go and use that task. So that was kind of what we wanted to cover today with respect to ArcGIS Pro tasks. I hope you got a little bit of a sense of the value and the potential that tasks have for memorializing analytic workflows. You will find that not only are we're hoping for the law enforcement community to start building and sharing their own tasks, but it's something that we're going to start to do moving forward with some of our solutions. If any of you have used the ArcGIS Pro for Intelligence solution, for example, you'll find that that solution comes out of the box with a whole host of ready-to-use tasks, and that's a capability that we see moving forward. We'd like to set up for some of our other solutions as well, including the crime analysis solution. Everything that you've seen today on this webinar is available to you at this single URL, esriurl.com/taskwebinar. What you're going to find in that folder, which is going to be on Microsoft OneDrive, is my PowerPoint. So if you want to be able to walk through what I've shared with you, I also have there the example ArcGIS Pro project that I shown you today, as well as the task that I showed you, as well as a couple of other example tasks, there's links to help documentation for building tasks. But most importantly, there's links to several web courses that are free for you if you're on maintenance that will train you further on how you build tasks in ArcGIS Pro. So there's a bunch of resources to help you get started with building ArcGIS tasks to support your organizational workflows. And then just one other thing that I wanted to mention, if you are in a position where maybe you don't have ArcGIS Pro, maybe you are interested in these capabilities for your agency, but you haven't been able to kind of make that case to your decision makers, Esri's recently released a really great ebook. You can see the cover of it right here, Modern Police Need Modern Technology. You can get access to it using the QR code that's on this screen right here. And if you grab that QR code, that's going to get you access to this ebook that kind of lays out all of the different ways in which modern law enforcement agencies are taking advantage of Esri technology and some of the cool new things that modern desktop and web GIS enable law enforcement agencies to do with their data. If you're new to our webinar series, the law enforcement webinar series, well, this is the final one of 2019, is a recurring webinar series, not only for law enforcement, but for all of public safety. And you'll find any new webinars that the Esri public safety team is doing at esri.com/pswebinar. So there's a whole bunch of other interesting ones that are happening over the next couple of months. There's going to be on the 11th, a webinar on enhancing security operations, talking about some of the open source GIS data sources that are available for you to use to augment security operations. There's going to be a webinar on January 9th around kind of the approach to handling the new normal and emergency management with ArcGIS. January 16th, we'll be looking at kind of the 2020 focus for PSAPs with respect to next-gen 911. And for some of you who are on the East Coast, we hope you'll join us and come see us in the public safety community on February 11th and 12th for our FedGIS conference in Washington, D.C. If you ever miss a webinar, you can find all of the recordings of all of our webinars are also available through this page. We have an entire YouTube library of all of our webinars. All of our webinars are recorded and accessible here. So if you're relatively new to our webinar series, but you're looking for ideas or other things to learn about across not only law enforcement, but national security, emergency management, fire and rescue, or call taking, dispatch, we have a whole library of recorded webinars that you can leverage.
Thanks, Chris. We have time for a few questions, and I got a couple ready to go from our listeners. First question is, how does a task compare to Model Builder, and are they going to replace Model Builder?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, whoever asked that. Thank you for asking that question. So I really think of tasks and Model Builder as complementary technologies, and the key differentiating factor between tasks and Model Builder is that the purpose of Model Builder is to support workflows where you want complete automation of the workflow. In Model Builder, you can choose to set parameters, and then you press run, and then the model performs a sequence of geoprocessing tools in order and then creates a result. You don't really touch the intermediate steps of a workflow in Model Builder. Additionally, Model Builder acts as sort of a visual coding alternative to writing Python as code. So if you're not a native coder, you can use Model Builder to build out a sequence of geoprocessing steps and export that to Python so that you could fully automate it using something like Windows Task Scheduler. In contrast, the purpose of tasks are when a user may need to touch every single step along the way, or at least multiple steps in some kind of workflow. And that's a capability that Model Builder doesn't really provide for you. You enter the parameters in Model Builder, and you press run, and then you get an output. It's either going to run the whole thing successfully, or it's going to fail because something happened and it doesn't work right. With tasks, you as the user are having an interaction with every one of these steps along the process. So it really is meant for workflows where someone needs to manually touch each piece of the process. And with respect to the training aspects of things, tasks serve a very different role than Model Builder. When you use Model Builder, a person who doesn't understand the workflow can't see the process, right? They just run it and it goes, and they get a result. They don't understand what's happening. With tasks, you can go step by step through a process, and you can teach someone about the various steps that you're doing so that they can better understand they can better not just create the product, but they can understand how they got there, and that can help teach them GIS. So question, they're very complementary products, but they have very specific uses. Tasks, when you want to touch multiple or all of the steps in a process, or you really want you're trying to teach someone about how you go about a process. Model Builder for full automation of a process, or as an alternative to coding itself, a visual coding alternative.
So would you use tasks to create symbol sets for specific crimes, so that when another analyst at your agency brings in data, they could use the task to symbolize those crime sets, or would you use a different function to do that?
Yeah, you could absolutely do that. So you could imagine a task that was, here's how you bring in and symbolize and then create a standard map layout for your CompStat report every month, right? So you'd have multiple steps. Step 1 would be add data. Step 2 would be geocode addresses. Step 3 would be import and apply this preset symbology layer file that a senior user has created. And then step 4 would be put this map into this predefined layout, modify the title and the descriptive text, and then step 5 is export to PDF. So in that way, if you're the more senior user, you can kind of define that process for a junior user, and they can just sort of walk through that process using the task, and that can help them get productive with generating routine maps quite quickly. Great question.
Thanks, Chris. Another along a similar line is, it's a big headache for analysts to get their cell tower data, their call detail records data from different providers into a usable format for analysis. Could I create a task that would help others through this process? Maybe create a task for each of the major providers?
Yeah, that's another great question. Thank you. So I showed very briefly how you would go about the steps of building kind of generally a task to create a 3D visualization of a call sequence. But to John's question, yeah, if you know the parameters, you know the unique combination of fields for example, Verizon, or for Sprint, or for T-Mobile in a call detail record, or in the cell tower data that you get as part of a subpoena, that represent the kind of unique combination of cell tower and sector for each record, you could predefine all those values and create tasks that make it easier for users to go through and import data from a particular provider. So if you're in the habit in your shop of doing a lot of analysis of cell phone data, and you want to be able to have kind of a task that's configured to each provider to make it easier for you to be able to import and use those tools, tasks is a great way to handle that particular problem.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. So this one is, I know you're going to share a couple of your sample tasks that you created, but is there going to be a place where maybe we could share tasks with the community, or or analysts can share tasks they've created that are best practices with the rest of the community?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I think it's something that we would be very much interested in working with the community to do. We can do that now in Esri's community, GeoNet. So we can work to build a GeoNet community to be able to share tasks related to crime analysis. But I think it's a great idea if the community is interested, maybe through professional organizations like the International Association of Crime Analysts or IALIA, the International Association of Law Enforcement Intelligence Analysts. If they have an interest in being able to house these resources as well, we're glad to work with whatever makes sense. But if you have a task, my suggestion would be, as you create a task, reach out to John and myself directly, and we can start to work to find a place for these things to live in perpetuity, whether that is in the IACA or IALIA world, or whether that's in Esri's GeoNet. This is a new capability, and it's something that we really want to start promoting with users in the law enforcement community. So we really welcome your tasks, and we want to support making tasks that people make in the community accessible to everyone who needs to be able to use that. So if you have tasks that you build, or if you have additional questions around tasks or around other law enforcement related GIS topics, you can see both John and I's email on this slide. Feel free to reach out to us, and we're glad to help out with any additional questions you might have. Follow us on Twitter at GISCOP and at CDelaneyGIS. John, any other final parting thoughts?
Nope. Great job. We'll see you on our next webinar. We haven't decided what we're doing yet, but keep an eye out for news to come about that. The next webinar from the both of us will be in February of 2020.
Thanks very much, everyone. Hope everyone has a safe and happy holiday season.
Thank you.